Hey Jackie, Auntie, Jackie, you ready? When the clouds roll.
Vulnerability? Well, in a world that often equates vulnerability with weakness, it's actually one of the most powerful keys when it comes to living our lives bold, fulfilled, and free. Now, it doesn't matter if you're that confident trailblazer woman. Vulnerability means acknowledging moments of doubt and pressure, increasing your ability to have more meaningful relationships. Now, you might feel like you're the accomplished woman, but yet unsure. But when we begin to open up about things like self doubt, it allows us to find true confidence and appreciation for our journey. Or even you might find yourself being the hesitant dreamer woman. Well, vulnerability, it becomes the first step in embracing aspirations and daring to take action. So, yes, vulnerability, it opens the door to authenticity, it opens the door to growth and deeper connections. But it's a process and it requires courage and discernment. So it's wise to be selective about who we share our most vulnerable moments with when it comes to choosing people who've earned our trust and can hold space for us. So today, let's talk about why vulnerability is a necessary component when it comes to personal growth and how it transforms our relationships, and why using discretion in choosing who we're vulnerable with, it can protect and empower us on the journey to becoming our own BFF, living our lives bold, fulfilled, and free. Has there ever been a time when you had the courage to show up and be seen when you had no control over the outcome? Well, that's a good example of being vulnerable. Now, some of the benefits or some of the positive things that can happen in our lives when we are vulnerable, it can unlock the ability for us to show up authentically, for us to be able to show up and be our true self. It's an opportunity for us to come behind the mask, take the mask off, and begin to shed layers of perfection, layers of things that society, our family, our friends, and people expect of us. It allows us to be seen and be the real you. So when we're true to ourselves, it's like the cornerstone of our lives. It's like the cornerstone of living our lives boldly, because it requires courage to be ourselves without fear of judgment. And there's another thing that happens when we step up and are willing to be vulnerable. It helps us to build deep connections, in our relationships, whether it's personal or professional. When we begin to be our true selves and show up in that manner, it helps to develop deep and meaningful connections. I'm sure you can appreciate when you have individuals in your lives when you can just be your true self. You don't have to worry about them judging you or critiquing you, but when you can be whoever you want to be on that particular day. There's sometimes we want to be joyful. There's sometimes we want to have a serious conversation. And sometimes we just want to talk and have someone listen. So when you have people in your lives that you can show up and be your true self like that, that helps develop meaningful connections. It helps you to allow yourself to be open about your fears, about your struggles, and even your dreams. And it also invites others to be open and willing to do the same. And as we do these things, it helps us create trust and emotional binds, and that will lead to stronger and more fulfilling relationships. Now, in life, sometimes we're filled with moments where vulnerability it is kind of thrust upon us. It just happens. You might be in a situation where you're just really vulnerable, and it could be through failure, it could be through rejection, it could be through uncertainty. I can remember, there were certain situations that I was dealing with, and It affected my ability to do some things. So I had to be more dependent upon others than what I was accustomed to. So that was an opportunity, or that was a situation where I had to be a little bit more vulnerable. And what I noticed that when that happened, it opened me up, it built the relationship, it helped me really appreciate the other person, it helped me to be able to be more comfortable in reference to sharing my fears, sharing, what I was uncomfortable with. And because of the compassion that was shown towards me, it also strengthened the relationship. So I'm sure you can think of many times when you had a special person or your friend that you were able to open up and, be transparent with, and that kind of build that relationship. So when we're vulnerable, it also allows us to reflect, it allows us to adapt, it allows us to evolve, and it makes us stronger. It makes us even more resilient. So again, as we're living bold, fulfilled, and free, it definitely requires us to show up and have courage. Have courage to be seen, even when we are uncertain about the outcomes. Vulnerability is like putting yourself out there, taking risks, facing even possibilities of failure. But it's in those moments that we begin to tap into our inner strength, begin to realize that even in failure, there's progress. You often hear me say, it's never bad. We always learn something in every situation. And it also has a way of just working out for our good. And as we move and go through our journey, we begin to see how all the dots begin to connect. So it helps us that when we're vulnerable, it helps us to not worry, have to be worrying about maintaining a facade of perfection. Oh my world, how often do we not do things because we feel like it's not going to be perfect? We're not going to show up and it's not going to be perfect. Even I'll use me as an example, even just recording this, it takes vulnerability because I have to be concerned. I'm worried about, if I'm articulating my words right, if the message is going to be clear, if people are going to hear it, if people are going to appreciate it. But you have to show up even not knowing what the outcome will be. So when we kind of stop trying to maintain that facade of perfection, it keeps us from dealing with burnout, because when we try to be perfect all the time, that could be exhausting. And that sometimes does lead to burnout. So when we're vulnerable, it frees us from the need to appear as though we have it all together. It definitely allows us to embrace our imperfections. It helps us make space for creativity, innovation, and even just true fulfillment. Vulnerability, it also cultivates empathy and compassion. Again, when we're vulnerable, it begins to show, we begin to have empathy and compassion for ourselves. And as we begin to embrace that for ourselves, it helps us to embrace it for others. You've heard me talk about, like in the word, it tells us we have to love ourselves first. And as we love ourselves, it gives us the ability to love others. When we're kind and tender with ourselves, when we're, show compassion, when we give ourselves grace and mercy and all of those things, it does help us to be able to extend that to others around us. So we begin to recognize that everybody faces struggles and everybody has insecurities, and begin to understand that it helps us to develop a deeper connection to the people that are in our lives. It allows us to navigate life with grace even in the face of challenges. Now, the amazing thing about vulnerability, it invites new opportunities. So when we begin to be vulnerable, it opens doors to experience many new things. It could be speaking, it could be opening a door for new connections, it could be opening a door for a new job opportunity. You just be amazed at some of the things that can happen as we begin to open ourselves up to be vulnerable. It can cause us to pursue passions. It could cause us to start a new venture. It also kind of moves us out of our comfort zone at times. And many times, it's also those moments of risk that we often find the most fulfillment and freedom. It might seem difficult and hard on the front end, but when we get to the other side, oh my God, it can bring so much fulfillment and freedom. So, when we talk about vulnerability it can be a path even to freedom. So we talk about often living our lives bold, fulfilled, and free. So as we open ourselves up to be vulnerable, it can definitely lead us to that path of freedom. Now, when we talk about vulnerability, the other thing that is also important, it's also important to have discernment of when, where, and who we are vulnerable with. So when it comes to being vulnerable, it is absolutely wise to use discretion when it comes to choosing who we're vulnerable with, because vulnerability is definitely powerful. It can be transformative, but it also requires a level of trust and safety. And it's so important, again, that we use discernment when we're sharing our vulnerabilities. Why? Because it protects our emotional well being. When we're vulnerable, we're up about our fears, we're opening up about our insecurities and our weaknesses. And again, if we share that information with the wrong person, wow, our vulnerability, it can be misunderstood, it can be used against us, it can lead to hurt or betrayal. And I'm sure many of you can relate to times that you share things, deeply things, personal things, only to find out that it was shared with others, only to go on Facebook and find things that you shared, to go to work and hear that your coworkers know about something that you share with someone. So again, when we use discretion, it definitely helps protect our emotional well being. It helps protect us by ensuring that those we confide in have already earned the right and the trust for us to be able to share with them, and that they have our best interests at heart. So when it comes to being discreet or having wisdom, when it comes to being vulnerable, it definitely requires a mutual level of respect and trust. So when we have healthy relationships that definitely have mutual respect and trust, it helps to build and helps thrive the relationship when we operate on that level. So before we share deeply and personal information, it's so important to evaluate whether that person has demonstrated qualities like empathy, being able to maintain the information, keep it confidential. They're non-judgment. If these elements are not present, it's possible that your vulnerability, it might not be handled with care. And again, as we said earlier, I'm sure if you reflect on your life, you can remember and you can relate of times when you experienced that. So I'm hoping you're beginning to see the value and the importance of discernment when it comes to being vulnerable. It's important to gauge the depth of the relationship. Not every relationship is suited for you to be vulnerable with. Some relationships you definitely don't want to do it, like professional ones, casual acquaintances. They may not have the depth, or the capacity to support the level of openness that you might be wanting to share. Sometimes close friends and families don't even have that capacity to be able to receive what you want to share. So it's so important to assess the type of relationship that you're having with someone before you decide to open up all about the things that are deeply to you. The other thing that helps is boundaries. Oh my world. We talk about boundaries so much. So we definitely, boundaries, they help protect our vulnerability. When we set boundaries, it also is a form of self-care. Because while we're being vulnerable, it helps to develop intimacy and connection. It's equally important to maintain those boundaries to protect yourself from emotional exhaustion, protect yourself from being potentially manipulated. So again, discretion, it ensures that we are sharing our personal experiences with those, again, who respect and honor our values. Now, vulnerability, it should invite support and non judgment. So you don't want to be vulnerable with someone and they're not supportive and you find that they're constantly judging and criticizing you. Because when we're sharing our vulnerable moments, what we're seeking is a connection. We're seeking understanding. We're seeking support. We're not seeking judgment or criticism. So again, being discerning, it definitely helps us to avoid opening up to people who may not provide that emotional support that we need. So and understand and we begin to get unsolicited advice and even judgment. So I'm hoping you're beginning to see why it's so important that we use discernment. We want to also be able to evaluate their capacity for empathy. Not everyone has that capacity to hold space for you when it comes to being vulnerable. Some people, they may be dealing with their own struggles, or they might not even have the emotional intelligence to respond with empathy. So again, when we show discretion, it definitely allows us to assess whether that person is even capable of offering empathy and compassion and being able to support whatever that situation requires for us. Again, when we're vulnerable, it requires a safe space. And when we have those safe spaces, that's what leads to growth. So vulnerability is the most impactful when it's shared in a safe space, when it's shared in a trusted space, when you practice discretion, and then you're ensuring that you're choosing those who will help you grow and who will help you be able to navigate whatever that season is in, rather than a space that leaves you feeling more exposed or wounded. So again, discernment, it doesn't mean, that you avoid vulnerability, but it definitely means that you want to use discretion. You want to be able to be wise about when and where and whom you share your information with. And it allows you to be open in relationships that are safe and supportive while maintaining the healthy boundaries in the others. So if you know that someone is not trustworthy, or you know that they're going to be critical and judgment, it doesn't mean that you can't have a relationship with them. You just know how to interact with them. I know Pastor Daniels, he has a book talking about, putting people in their right place, or remembering, knowing the type of relationship. Is it a person that is it a friend? Is it an associate? Is it a mentor? Is it an advisor? So when we're clear on the type of people that we're engaging with, it does help us to be able to know who we should be vulnerable with and who we shouldn't. So again, vulnerability is beautiful. It's very a necessary part of living bold, fulfilled, and free. And again, it should be paired with discernment by being intentional about who we share our vulnerabilities with. And as you're protecting yourself from unnecessary harm, it begins to help develop a deeper and more meaningful connections to those who truly support and care about you. So I hope these conversations on vulnerability has helped you. I would love to get your feedback. I would love to see how you navigate those situations in your life. But remember, just continue to live bold, fulfilled, and free. Until next time, take care.